Hey guys, so today's video is going to be pretty different from something you might normally see on this channel. I'm looking at an empty spreadsheet right now because I've got some notes that I'm going to be going over in a second. But the reason for today's video is to respond to the news yesterday that Reckful, a streamer on Twitch, has taken his own life. I followed Reckful off and on over the years, and I was pretty familiar with his struggles with depression. It was something that he was pretty transparent about on his stream. And, I followed him through a lot of those ups and downs. When I was younger, I definitely related to a lot of that struggle. And recently, he started doing talks with Dr. K from Healthy Gamer about everything that he was going through. And I remember listening to those talks and feeling like just wishing, I guess, that I could reach out to him in some way and help, because fortunately for me, I've actually been able to arrive at a place in my life where I am pretty good when it comes to depression. It's still there. It's still something that I battle with, but it's not this sort of overbearing force that rules over my life like it used to be. And I can imagine that if things, especially in my 20s, had continued to get worse instead of getting better, that I could have ended up in the same place that Reckful ended up. There were definitely times where I had no desire to live, and the only reason that I didn't take my own life was because I was worried about what it would do to my mom and dad. This is kind of dark, but there were even times where I fantasized about the day when my mom and dad would finally pass, so that I wouldn't have any more obligations forcing me to continue to exist. So that was my mindset at certain times throughout my life, and it's not my mindset anymore. And a lot of the reason that I've been able to make it this far, I feel like really just comes down to luck. It comes down to hearing the right things from the right people at the right time. And I actually wrote Reckful an email last December when he started talking to Dr. K, where I kind of tried to explain a little bit about what I went through and offer him some ideas or some advice. But I don't know if he ever read it, or if it would have even helped if he did read it. But it's like, I guess it boils down to this. I have gone through a lot, and I have come through a lot, and I've learned a lot, and I want to pass what I've learned on as much as I can to other people who are struggling. So instead of, just writing an email to an individual like I did last December, I want to make this video, and I want to talk to you guys about what I've done to make it this far. And I think that a lot of you will find this stuff really helpful. I know that I did. A lot of these ideas kind of surprised me when I came across them. It was things that I definitely wish people had told me sooner. And some of the ideas are complex, and they'll take a while to unpack, and you're not really, you might not necessarily get everything that you need to get out of this one video, but hopefully I can give you a starting point that you can launch off of, so that you can explore some of these ideas more deeply. It's going to be a mixture of ideas and practice, and I've broken it up into 3 sections, so you can kind of see the categories down there at the bottom. There's going to be the basic / physical stuff, the mental and emotional strategies, and then we're going to get a little bit deeper and talk about finding meaning and overcoming nihilism. And I'm going to try to approach all these things in a way that doesn't require any certain, like religious worldview or spiritual practice or anything like that. These are things that I think will be applicable to anyone who's listening, and hopefully some of this stuff resonates with you guys. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by talking about how depression manifested for me, to see if it's something that you can relate to see if it sounds like something that's similar to what you might be going through. The first thing that I have here is that depression is not sadness. So everyone experiences sadness because tragedy is going to strike in everyone's life, and it's something that's not avoidable. and you can't really defeat sadness. And I don't necessarily even think that we should try. Like, when sad things happen, it's natural to be sad, and that's just going to be part of life. Depression is different. Depression can be defeated, it can be avoided, it can be overcome. Like, I see depression as an enemy that should be battled, whereas I see sadness as just kind of, part of the inevitability of life, and of caring about things. So when it comes to depression, it started off for me as a lack of enjoyment of things that should have been fun. Things that used to be fun when I was younger kind of stopped being fun as I was older. And I would be around my friends, and they would all just be, it seemed like they were experiencing levels of joy that I no longer had access to, and I couldn't really figure out why. That then led to inertia, lack of motivation. I would sleep in well past noon. I never wanted to get out of bed. I didn't really have a reason to get out of bed because things didn't excite me anymore. Underlying beliefs. This is a little bit different from depression, but I'm gonna talk about this a lot throughout the video. The idea of nihilism, the idea of things not mattering. Throughout my college years and my 20s, I developed this belief system that, once I lost my religion, my belief system was basically, okay, so everything is just the here and now physical world. We're all particles bouncing off of each other. So why does any of it matter? There's no ultimate meaning to any of this. And nihilism and depression aren't exactly the same thing. They're two separate problems, but they're connected in a lot of ways. One of them often leads to the other. And so I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more throughout the video. So that then led to despair. Things are bad and they're getting worse. And I would go through these cycles where even if things got better for a short period of time, they would always get worse afterwards. And once that repeated a few times, I would feel like, okay, every time something starts to get better, it's just going to get worse again. So there's no hope, and my life is never going to really improve. And so death starts to look like a logical option at that point. It starts to look like the only option. If things are just going to get worse over time, then why bother? Finally, inability to make people understand, which leads to feeling isolated, alone, and insane. I would try to talk to people about what I was going through. Most of the time, they just couldn't understand what I was saying. A lot of people give you advice when it comes to depression that's basically something along the lines of stop being depressed. And they're well intentioned when they tell you these things, but the fact is, a lot of people just don't know how to talk about depression. They haven't experienced it themselves. And even if they have, maybe they just don't have any solutions for you, or they don't, it's hard for people to relate to this sort of thing. And so I began to feel very isolated. I began to feel like I was the only one who was going through this, or, even if other people were going through it, it didn't seem like we were able to have any sort of, meaningful exchange regarding how to make things better. And eventually I started to feel crazy. I started to feel like I was not part of the same reality as everyone else. There must have been, something wrong with my brain, or something. Why couldn't I just see things the way that other people saw them? Now, I'm no longer caught in any of these sort of cycles of despair. Nowadays, I do see color more brightly. I do experience beauty in a way that I couldn't when I was in my 20s. I have better relationships than I used to, less toxic relationships. I can relate to people more. They can relate to me more. All these things have gotten better. And that's not to say that my depression is gone. And if I don't take good care of myself, it certainly comes back in big ways. But I have the tools now to keep all of these things at bay and to live a good life. That's really what it comes down to. And even though my depression isn't gone, my nihilism is gone. And that's a very triumphant thing for me to be able to say, because I never thought that I was going to overcome nihilism. I mean, I was so nihilistic in my 20s, and I thought that I would never be able to rediscover the meaning that I had when I was younger, when I still believed in God. But I have, and I haven't needed to fall back on religion to do that. For people who are religious, that's fine. My mind doesn't really work that way, and yet I've still been able to establish meaningful relationships and just a philosophy of ultimate meaning that works in the absence of a religious context, which seemed like a logical impossibility when I was younger, and yet here we are. So I want to talk a little bit more about that in the last part of the video. For now, I want to start with just the basics, because a lot of the stuff, a lot of the reasons why you might be depressed might be kind of easy to solve, quite frankly. It's not always about like deeper issues. Sometimes there's just something that you're doing wrong physically that can be a serious cause of depression and all sorts of other problems when it comes to just like mental clarity and mood and energy levels and things like that. So let's go through those first. So the first thing here is exercise. Exercise is miraculous. It is the best thing that you can do for yourself for so many reasons, and it's not as hard as you think. Even if you're only exercising for 10-15 minutes a day, it's 100 times better than no exercise at all. There's so many benefits to exercise, I won't even begin to list them here. One way to think about this is, we are evolved to deal with scarcity, right? Like throughout human history, before agriculture and everything else, we were constantly battling for resources. And if you manage to get enough resources accumulated so that you could rest, your body, one of the ways your body might react to that is by telling you, don't spend any more energy, just stay put. Don't go out and do anything. Don't move, so that you spend as less energy as, the least amount of energy possible. And in modern society, where a lot of our immediate needs are met, we can just go to the grocery store and get food. We don't really have to struggle to feed ourselves. It's very easy for some of these mechanisms to kick in, where it's just like, who cares, man? Just sleep until 3 o'clock. Like, it's better to just not spend energy. But the truth is, if you actually force yourself to get up and do something, then your body will respond to that. Your body will start to give you what you need. You'll get those endorphins. You'll start to feel better. The world will start to brighten up. You'll have a better mood. You'll have more energy. You'll have more desire to do things. You'll be more capable of doing things. Exercise is just amazing. You don't need any equipment. Google videos on calisthenics if you want to get started. Just beginner calisthenics. Type that into YouTube. There's tons of ways to get started. Even if you just start off by doing a couple push-ups or something, like start from there and then do a couple more the next day. Do whatever you can, and you will see benefit rapidly as you begin to incorporate exercise into your routine. The next thing is eat better. So I was taught about the food pyramid when I was in school, where like 60% of your diet was supposed to be bread or something like that. Just ridiculous. There's a lot of bad information about nutrition out there. And, even now there's a lot of argument about what's good for you and what's bad for you, but there is a consensus around certain things. And so the most clear nutritional advice I can give you that's kind of above debate is avoid refined carbs. So no pizza, pasta, candy. If you're drinking sugary soft drinks, that's poison. You should stop. Beer is another one of those things. It's very, it's a lot of refined carbs in beer, plus the alcohol doesn't help with depression either. Obviously probably doesn't need to be said, but if you are depressed, alcohol is making things worse. So you should definitely limit your consumption. I have here cheat days, like once a week if you have to. So when it comes to diet, like you have to pick something that's reasonable. You have to pick something that you're actually going to stick to. There's no reason to eat super healthy for 3 days and then go like binge and eat, an entire pizza on day 4. You have to set yourself realistic goals, just like exercise, that you'll actually meet, and then just build up from there. Now, what I found is that after a few weeks of eating healthy, my taste buds actually started to change, so that healthy food that was kind of bland before actually started to taste pretty good. And, sugary foods or candy or whatever, like if I stopped eating candy for a few weeks and then had a bite of candy, it tasted like 10 times better. I didn't even realize how good candy could taste because I was so desensitized to it. So just spread that stuff out as much as you can, limit it as much as you can. And you'll start to notice yourself feeling differently when you eat better, to the point where, like, if I have a few slices of pizza now, I can, within an hour, I can physically feel myself being like more tired and sluggish because the rest of my diet is so clean. I have that contrast now. Before, when I was eating unhealthy all the time, I was just tired all the time, so I had no contrast. But once you actually start to eat healthy, you'll feel that contrast, and you might not even have the desire to eat like pizza and junk food anymore because you'll be able to feel how it affects you. I originally got into, this is kind of a side note, but I originally got into eating healthy for a completely different reason. I had a really big problem with acne when I was younger, and a dermatologist told me that I should stop eating breads, rice, and pasta because it was causing, I don't remember exactly the explanation, but something about like blood sugar spikes and insulin or something, and that causes you to break out. So I actually started eating healthier because I wanted to get rid of my acne. I used to have like really ugly acne on my face and really painful acne on my back to where I couldn't even lay down sometimes. Um, and I actually noticed all the benefits of eating better sort of on accident. After a couple weeks of avoiding these foods so that my skin would clear up, suddenly like my mood was elevated and my memory was better, and I had all these other benefits. And so it's definitely noticeable, and you should try it. Next thing, supplements, fish oil and vitamin D, very easy to get. I don't think they have any side effects. Maybe like very, very rarely people might be allergic or something, but there should be little to no risk taking fish oil and vitamin D. They're both super good for you, both really good for your mood and your immune system and other things. Sunlight is super good. One of the reasons why you take vitamin D is because a lot of us don't get enough sunlight. But if you live in a part of the world where you can get consistent sunlight, definitely do that. Sunlight it's even better than vitamin D. I know that vitamin D is supposed to be the main thing that we're getting from sunlight, but the supplementing vitamin D isn't quite as good in my experience. I definitely feel better when I actually spend time out directly in the sun, even though I also take vitamin D supplements. So try to get as much of the sunlight as you can. Obviously don't like go out for hours at a time and sunburn yourself or anything like that. But even like 15, 20 minutes a day outside in the sun, super beneficial. Sleep. Go to bed and wake up as close to the same time as possible every day. So your body wants to have a natural rhythm of sleep. And if you train it to go to bed around the same time every night and wake up around the same time every morning, then you'll see a lot of benefits from that. You won't need to sleep as much. You won't feel as tired and crappy in the morning when you first wake up if your body is used to this cycle. I have here, undersleeping is bad, but so is oversleeping. So a lot of times when I would feel really tired, I would be sleeping like 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 hours. That is not good for you. Even if you feel tired, don't sleep for 14 hours. Oversleeping has actually been linked to a lot of different problems. Undersleeping is bad, but oversleeping is also bad. 7.5 hours is pretty good. This varies a little bit with age. But if it's 7.5 hours of actual sleep, that means not 7.5 hours of laying down, but 7.5 hours of actually being asleep. So if it takes you 20 minutes to fall asleep, then you might need 8 hours in bed or 8.5 hours or something like that. But don't be spending 11, 12 hours in bed. It's not good for you. It's actually counterproductive. There are apps that you can use that will track your sleep. There's like a Fitbit or whatever that you can put on your wrist that'll tell you how much actual sleep and the quality of your sleep that you're getting. So those things can help. They're not necessary if you follow a good schedule. The best from my research, the best time to go to sleep at night seems to be around 10 p.m. If you can go to bed at or before 10 p.m., then that's really good for your body's just natural cycle to follow the rising and setting of the sun. Because then you can kind of get up earlier in the day when the sun is getting up, and your body seems to acclimate to that pretty well. But even if you're someone who stays up to 12 or 1, as long as you actually go to bed at midnight every night, and you're getting up at 8 or 9 in the morning every morning, that's the more important thing. That the consistency is more important than what time you actually go to sleep. But you'll definitely notice this. And the last thing I have here is weed probably isn't helping you. So I know some of you are going to be very upset to hear this, but a lot of people use weed to help them sleep. And even though weed helps you fall asleep, it's kind of like alcohol in the sense that like alcohol can help you fall asleep, but the quality of sleep that you get is reduced. Um, so if you feel like you're not getting good rest, then you might have to lay off the THC. Um, you could just use CBD as an alternative. CBD is one of the like properties, not properties, but you know what I mean. It's one of the things that you get when from the same plant where you get THC, but it's not psychoactive. And as far as I know, it doesn't mess with your sleep, but it will help you relax. So you can Google CBD and find some supplements, or you can find some at the same dispensary where you get your weed. And CBD is legal in all 50 states. It's not psychoactive. It doesn't get you high. It just helps you relax. The last thing that I have here is antidepressants. So if you implement all these other things, if you're exercising, you're eating right, you're taking healthy supplements, you have a good sleep schedule, you're not drinking too much or smoking too much or doing other things that are destroying your health. If you're doing all those things and you don't see any improvement, then there's probably a chemical problem. I think this is a lot rarer than people make it out to be. A lot of times when you go to the doctor and you say that you're depressed, this is the first thing they do is they try to put you on antidepressants. I would not treat this as the first solution. I would treat this as sort of a last resort after you've done these other things. But the fact of the matter is, depression as a chemical problem is real. And for some people, antidepressants are necessary and they will have a huge improvement. So talk to your doctor about it. But I would recommend talking to your doctor after you've done these other things, because these other things are very, very likely to solve the problem before antidepressants will. And then you don't have to deal with the side effects or anything like that. The stigma around antidepressants isn't nearly what it used to be. If you ask your friends, you might be surprised how many of them will openly admit that they are on medication or were on medication sometime in the past. It's not a big deal, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's just a chemical solution to a chemical problem. So that's really important, because a lot of people, especially if you're a little bit older, you probably grew up with sort of a stigma around antidepressants. Like people didn't really want to admit that they were on antidepressants because it seemed like a sign of weakness or something like that. That stigma has really fallen off in recent years. I think people are starting to understand that there's nothing weak about needing medicine to address a medical issue. It just is what it is. Like it's a chemical solution to a chemical problem. That's all it is. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a big deal. If you feel like you need it, then talk to your doctor and just do it. And then the last thing is, it also doesn't have to necessarily be permanent. I was only on antidepressants for about 6 or 8 months when I first started to turn my life around and get things sorted out. And, with the help of these other things, the exercise and diet and everything else, I felt like I no longer needed the antidepressants. And I talked to my doctor and I stopped taking them. Last thing to say here before we move on, you're not going to be perfect at all of this, especially when you're starting out. I've been, practicing healthy habits for years now, and there's still days where I stay up too late and sleep in too late. There's still days where, I cheat and eat junk food. There's still days where I am too lazy to exercise and I just play video games all day. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But the point is, the more of these things you do, the better off you'll be. And even if you just do a little bit of this stuff, even if you just eat healthy a couple days a week, even if you exercise 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes every other day, like even a small amount of this stuff will make a huge impact, and it'll give you the momentum that you need to do a little bit more the next week and a little bit more than the week after that. And, before you know it, you can see tremendous progress, and it's all just depends on you. So don't beat yourself up for not being perfect. It is what it is, and you'll get better over time. Now, mental and emotional strategies. Okay, so the first thing I have here is meditation. And a lot of people think meditation is like, you're sitting here with like, it doesn't have to be like this Zen monk sort of thing. You can meditate while going for a walk. You can even meditate while like washing dishes. The goal of meditation is just to quiet your mind. A lot of times, especially like if you're a gamer type, a lot of times your brain is just running 24/7 all the time, racing thoughts. You're always focused on something, always solving something, always thinking about something. And The goal is to just sort of hit the pause button on that and give your mind time to kind of relax and recalibrate. And all you want to do when you're meditating is just try to clear your thoughts and focus on like something physical, like your breathing or your surroundings or like a physical task that you're accomplishing. This is actually another reason why exercise is so beneficial, because if you're working out hard, you kind of can't think. Like you have to focus on the physical task in hand, and that really helps to clear your mind. So meditation can be paired with a lot of other activities. It doesn't just have to be you sitting still, being bored out of your mind, and you will be awful at meditation when you first start. It is totally normal to be able to clear your thoughts for an entirety of zero point 0.1 seconds before they come racing back. This is a skill that you have to practice like anything else. So if, just don't beat yourself up over it. Every time you feel your thoughts start to race again, just acknowledge that and try to refocus your attention on your breath or whatever else it is that you're doing, and try to keep your head clear. And just practice that over and over again. It's just like working out a muscle. You practice over and over again, and it gets stronger over time. You will be bad at it at the beginning, and the more you do it, the better you'll get. Even just 10 minutes of meditation a day is enough to see huge benefits. They've done tons of studies on these. Journaling, introspection, and therapy. So your memories, trauma, things that you've been through will affect you whether you realize it or not. And I think this is something that a lot of people kind of already realize, but still maybe don't necessarily take the time to do anything about it. And I don't think it takes a lot of time, but it's another one of those things where just setting aside 10 minutes a day, or even when it comes to journaling, even like if you just set aside like 20 minutes, once a week, that's probably pretty good. If you feel like you need more than that, then, write more. But make sure you're taking some sort of break to stop and think about your life, think about your behavior, think about the decisions that you're making. Because, and I know with my life, I would get caught into certain routines and certain ways of thinking, and it was just like I would stay stuck in that way of thinking or that way of acting for so long before I would stop and think about it. It was like wake up, go to school, go to work, come home, play video games, go to bed, repeat. I didn't really take the time to introspect, to focus on my growth or, what was leading me to do certain things. So I found it hugely beneficial whenever what would happen for me is that time would go by and I would start to feel worse and worse and worse, and I wouldn't understand why. And then when I would sit down and write about it, like there would be some nights where I just couldn't sleep, where I just felt awful. I just felt like lonely and desperate, and I couldn't figure out why. And when I actually stopped and wrote down something in my journal, I would be able to process those things just from setting aside the time to focus on them. And a lot of times that would lead me to encounter something that made me really sad. I would realize that I was acting in a certain way because of, because I was hurting. Like, and one example is, when I was 22, I was married for 10 months. And the reason the marriage was so short is because my ex-wife cheated on me. And so, this wasn't just a betrayal. This was a betrayal from the person who I loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world. And that definitely hurt. That definitely left a scar. And, there were times where I would, simple things would have this huge effect on me. Like, there'd be a girl that I went on like one date with. And, next time I called her, she'd ghost me or something, like she wouldn't be interested. And it felt like this huge rejection, even though we barely knew each other. And it's not something that should have really bothered me at all, but it would sting super badly. And I would just go back to distracting myself and not really thinking about it. And, I would just suffer unnecessarily over certain things. And then when I finally stopped to write about it in my journal, I realized that the pain of my divorce and being cheated on was affecting me in ways that I didn't want to admit, because I didn't want to give her that power, right? Like I didn't want to give my ex-wife the power of of affecting me in that way. I didn't want to admit that. But when I confronted that voluntarily, instead of just letting it unconsciously affect me, I was able to be honest with myself about how it was affecting me, and I was able to come up with strategies about how to move past it. You know, how much of that trauma I needed to learn from, and how much of that trauma I needed to let go. Because trauma has a lesson. That's one of the things that trauma does. You know, it has kind of a logic to it. A lot of times your body will hold on to things, or your mind will hold on to things, because you haven't fully processed it. And that can be dysfunctional. You know, you can learn the wrong lessons from trauma, and you can learn good lessons from trauma, but the only way you're going to navigate that is by taking the time to do it consciously. Because if you just let things run on autopilot, I mean, who knows which version of that you're going to get. So journaling isn't the only way to do this. Therapy is another really good way. If you can't afford therapy, or if you haven't been able to find a therapist that you click with, because that can be kind of hard, maybe just find a friend. If there's someone that you trust who you can open up to about these things, a lot of times just verbally processing is just as good. For some people, it might even be better than writing things out. The point is to just set aside time to examine yourself, and to do so consciously, rather than letting those unconscious things drive you. Self-compassion. Beating yourself up. I've talked about this several other times throughout the video already, about how beating yourself up is counterproductive. I'm so lazy, I can't even exercise for 10 minutes. This is something I've said to myself many times. This is one that I particularly struggled with, the idea of self-compassion. I lived a fairly privileged and easy life from an outside perspective, and I've kind of weaponized that against myself. Like, there's people who are suffering way more than you. Like, your life is easy. What, you can't even exercise for 10 minutes? Why are you so useless? Like, that was a lot of my internal dialogue at the height of my depression, because I knew things back from the previous page about how I should be exercising, or I should be taking better care of myself, or whatever, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. There were days where it was like, I haven't exercised today. I know I should exercise today, but I just don't want to. And then I would beat myself up over that. God, you're so useless. Why can't you exercise for 10 minutes? Now, did beating myself up help me to establish better habits? Not really. It didn't really solve anything. And so instead, the approach that I've learned to take over time is to treat myself as if I'm someone that I'm responsible for taking care of. So if I had like a little brother or a child or something who I was trying to help through something difficult, I wouldn't just like yell and insult them every time they failed. Instead, I would find ways to encourage them. So if I wouldn't insult or belittle someone that I cared about, then why am I yelling at and belittling myself? It's not an effective strategy. It's not useful. It's just indulgent, really. So if there's a night where I'm feeling particularly depressed and I can't exercise for 10 minutes, then I negotiate with myself. Okay, how about 5 minutes? How about 30 seconds? I can exercise for 30 seconds, I can do a few push-ups, or run a couple laps around the block or something. I guess that would be more than 30 seconds, but there's some tiny amount of exercise that I can negotiate with myself that I'll actually accomplish, or whatever other habit that I'm struggling with. There's some tiny amount that I can negotiate with myself where it's like, okay, fine, I'll do 30 seconds. And then a lot of times what I find is that 30 seconds ends up turning into 60 seconds, or, maybe I end up doing the full workout that I wasn't motivated enough to do, just after negotiating and agreeing on that 30 seconds with myself. So, just have a dialogue with yourself as if you're someone that you care about, and try to genuinely develop that care for yourself. You are a human being. Your pain is real. Even if you're someone like me who's in a privileged situation, your pain is real because you feel it. So, it doesn't do anything to beat yourself up. Instead, just treat yourself like you're someone that you care about, and try to move forward. Break negative thought patterns, practice gratitude. So these two things kind of go hand in hand. When you think about things over and over again in the same way, your brain will physically build pathways to get back to that thought pattern over and over again. So, if you experience a lot of negativity, if you think negatively about a lot of things, then your brain will actually physically reinforce that and make it easier for you to get back to those negative beliefs or those negative reactions. And so, if you want that to stop happening, then you need to consciously disrupt it. So, one of the things that I learned to do is every time I would have a negative thought pattern arise, I would try to recognize it and then disrupt it so that it couldn't finish, and I would redirect my thoughts somewhere else. So, I have an example here about like hot water. If let's say that the water heater breaks and you have to take a cold shower. There's different ways you could react to that. I think the default reaction for most of us is going to be something like, we're gonna be upset. There's no hot water. I have to take a cold shower. That's horrible, right? But obviously, there's other ways you can look at it. Maybe we could be grateful for the fact that we have this miraculous water delivery system that's even heated that just comes to our house like magic and gives us showers where we can just have gallons of water that we can use every day. It's actually pretty crazy. 99.99% of human history, we haven't had that. And in in much of the world, they still don't have that. And so, um, you know, you, when I first started thinking about this, it kind of, I don't know, kind of seemed kind of like cheesy to me. Like, oh, you're going to be grateful that you have a hot shower. But I don't really think it's that cheesy because there are people from other parts of the world who would be genuinely grateful that they had a hot shower, right? Like if you took some villager who barely has clean water to begin with and you brought them over to the United States and you gave them a hot shower, they would probably think that's pretty sweet. Like they would genuinely be excited about that. So if they can do it, then why can't we? Just because we're used to it? It's all subjective. It all comes down to how you frame things and how you decide to react to things that happen in your life. Now, obviously, some things are harder to reframe than others. There's going to be genuine tragedy that strikes your life. If you lose someone that you love, there's not really a positive way to spin that, right? You can't like reframe the death of a family member or something. And so that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is unnecessary negative thought patterns that you might have reinforced in your brain without even realizing it. There's a lot of things, if you have the ability to sit down and watch this YouTube video, chances are you have a lot of things in your life that you can be grateful for. You're probably pretty well off compared to most. And so why not focus on the things that you have that make you well off instead of focusing on the things that you don't have that make your life a little bit, harder or less convenient. Because, we have made a lot of progress and a lot of us are in situations that are drastically thousands of times better than the situation that our ancestors are in or the situation that people in poorer countries are in. So it helps to think about that and helps to keep that in context. Gratitude is a good feeling to have. It's if you can train yourself to experience gratitude even for little things, your whole outlook on life will start to change and wrap around that, and you'll feel it in a big way. And it'll make your relationships a lot better too, because people like being around someone who has gratitude and rather than someone who's, negative and complaining all the time. Equanimity. Pain is unavoidable, but suffering is a choice. So you've probably heard this cliche, and it is kind of a cliche, but I like it anyways. The fact is, like we've said, tragedy cannot be avoided. Everyone's life will have tragedy. But you can choose how you interpret that tragedy. You can choose how you react to it. And in the context of depression, you don't have to be your depression. And this is an idea that took me a while to wrap my head around. I remember reading about equanimity in like self-help books and didn't really get it at first. But the idea is that you don't have to listen to your depression. You don't have to believe or come up with rationalizations for why you're depressed. So when I was younger, whenever I was depressed, I always assigned some higher meaning to it. I was depressed because I didn't have the relationship that I wanted, or I was depressed because I was unhappy at my job. Like I always had to come up with a reason that I was depressed. There doesn't have to be some greater meaning to your depression. You can be happy even if your job sucks, right? So instead, if you learn to take a step back and just examine your depression as something you're experiencing, depression starts to be like, it's like stubbing your toe or something. It's a feeling that you encounter, but you don't have to identify with it. You don't have to assign a bunch of meaning to it. You don't have to let it become who you are. And you can develop a way of being where even when difficult things, even when tragedy strikes in your life, you have like a kind of a baseline stability, or a way to be okay regardless of the tragedy that you encounter. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the final section too. But I guess the main thing that I want to drive here is don't take your depression that seriously. You don't have to listen to it. It's just chemicals in your brain. You can master that. You can do things to mitigate it. You can redirect your thoughts. You can redirect your actions. Ultimately, you are the one in control, and you are separate from the things that you are feeling. They're not one and the same. So it's a little bit dense of an idea to unpack quickly, but something definitely that I think is worth thinking more about, because this idea has done wonders for me personally. So the last tab that I have here is finding meaning and overcoming nihilism. And these things are difficult to summarize quickly. For me, this was like months of thinking and listening to lectures by a psychologist from the University of Toronto. Really wrestling with these issues until I felt like I had actually broken away from my previous worldview. And I think how I want to introduce this last section here is actually by reading the email that I wrote to Reckful in December, for two reasons. One, because it kind of tells the story of how my journey towards finding meaning and defeating nihilism began. And I guess the second reason is just that, in light of everything that happened, it feels better than just leaving it unread in an inbox somewhere. So if you guys will indulge me, I'm going to read that now. Hey Byron, this is a bit long, but please bear with me. I believe I have some insight from being in a similar position for you for a long time. I'm hoping that you might find it helpful, and I'm going to do my best to articulate it as effectively as possible. I remember learning years ago the top WoW PvPer Reckful was actually the guy who played Anti-Parazi on Darktide. I started watching your stream and I couldn't believe how much I resonated with the things you said. By then, we were both constantly wishing for the past, for games that had been long dead, instead of the mediocre MMO genre that we had now. Our lives seemed to follow the same parallel as our games. Things would only get better temporarily, and then they would continue to slowly degrade, and we always longed for how things used to be. I was something like the Anti-Parazi of the Pacific server on Ultima Online, a top PK, maybe the top PK, throughout my teenage years and some of college. The game was my life. When it died, a part of me died too. There's hardly anyone else I can talk to about this kind of stuff. Nobody understands, or they think it's pitiful that I suffered years of depression because I could no longer play a video game. And yeah, it does sound dumb, even when I type it now, but of course, the game isn't the real reason I felt that way. Not that I knew that at the time. I listened to your talk with Dr. K, and I'm really happy that you were able to express some of what you're going through and get some healthy direction. I hope your work on Everland allows you to find meaning and fill the void that keeps manifesting in your life. However, I'm worried that, like before, that feeling of ultimate meaningless will sneak back into your life as it did with mine. And if that's the case, there's a resource that might help you to get to the bottom of things once and for all. In addition to losing Ultima Online in college, I also lost my religion around the same time. My belief in God at the time was a foundation that allowed me to move forward, believing that my life was worth living and that I had some purpose, even when my thoughts and emotions told me otherwise. Without it, I was driven to nihilism. I started to act out nihilism. I lived only for power and pleasure. My effort was spent on making myself look good so that I could hook up with women, something which never seemed to pay off the way that I thought it would, and in fact, never even paid off as much as playing Ultima Online did. I have a degree in both philosophy and religious studies because I was obsessed with finding the truth in college. Neither degree was remotely helpful. If anything, they just raised more questions than answers. My nihilism only got worse over time until I started to view every relationship I had as a power-based game of meaningless molecules bouncing around each other that just so happened to evolve into the life form that was me. A few years ago, I stumbled across a guy named Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan's podcast. He often gets painted as a political figure by certain journalists, but his real goal is to understand the structure of meaning and how we've been able to find it throughout history. Jordan Peterson's philosophy cured my nihilism. It doesn't require God or the Dharma or any other religious dogma that I suspect we are both too skeptical to fall for. It examines those traditions to see what partially articulated truth or wisdom they were passing down in their myths and stories. But the fundamental concept that cures the void of meaninglessness, in Peterson's way of thinking, requires no dogmatic, structured religion, no New Age truisms, no secrets, no BS. At its core, it only requires one thing: a foundational philosophical decision that being as such is good enough to justify all the unnecessary suffering that we and other people will experience in our lives. And he provides a way to get there that really seriously works. Millions of people have turned their lives around as a result of his lectures. The things that Dr. K discussed that resonated with you, such as purpose, which he sees as the religious Dharma concept, can be understood without the dogmatic component, and Peterson has extraordinarily detailed maps for how these things emerge. Ultimately, while there will be parallel concepts that someone like Dr. K can teach you, and these will certainly be helpful, the dogma will eventually be a barrier unless you have the same religion as him. And so without the dogma, you'll be missing the underlying foundational belief about why life is worth it in the most fundamental sense. I don't have a void in my life anymore. I'm not saying that depression or negativity are 100% gone from my life, but when those things do come up, they are infinitely more bearable than they used to be. My life has foundation, purpose, drive. I still experience tragedy and suffering, but I never experience hell like I did when I was a nihilist. There's a huge difference. If any of this resonated with you, I would love to talk to you about it further. Even though we don't know each other, I always felt like we had a lot in common when I watched your streams, and I'm ever hopeful that you will find a way forward. If you'd rather not dive into a deep substructural philosophy with a stranger from the internet, I totally understand, no hard feelings. Instead, check out this lecture from Peterson. There's a ton more that I can recommend if this one helps. In years of searching, this is by far the deepest understanding of human nature that I've come across. Wishing you the best. And then I link a video that I'm going to talk about here. So, sorry. I'm probably going to add a new channel to my Discord server after this, if you guys are interested in these kinds of discussions. Probably like a wellness channel or something like that. You know, like I said before, I wish that I could have talked to Reckful about this stuff. I don't know if it would have helped, but if you guys have been finding any of this helpful so far, I'm totally down to talk about it further. And so I'll put a link to Discord in the description if you guys ever want to chat about this stuff. Now, let's get back to the notes. Like I said, this stuff is kind of tough to unpack quickly. For me, listening to Jordan Peterson's podcast with Joe Rogan, it started off like he would say certain things that would resonate with me. He would tell a certain story, or he would describe a certain mythology, and I would be captivated by it, and I wouldn't really fully understand why, but I knew he was onto something. And it took a while to really fully process what it was he was onto. But basically what Jordan Peterson has done is, he studied mythology, he studied the Bible, he studied old human stories, and he's looked at them from a psychological perspective rather than a religious perspective. And he's found a way to sort of extract the underlying concepts that have built up our religions. And he's found ways that people can implement those independent of their religious beliefs. And, there's, like I said, there's no way that I can really quickly summarize that. All I can say is that his lectures are extremely worth listening to. This first video right here is a good sort of like summary of a lot of the things that he talks about. And then I've got some other videos down here that'll go further into depth. But I highly recommend checking out at least this first video by Jordan Peterson and just seeing if any of it resonates with you. So I want to talk about two main concepts that I was able to learn from Peterson's lectures. The first is rely on meaning to sustain you, not happiness. Happiness is nice, but it comes and goes. Meaning can be a permanent, reliable, nourishing fixture in your life, regardless of your religious system. So, meaning is like pain, in the sense that pain is undeniable. When you experience pain, you know it's real. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. When you're in pain, you know you're in pain. And you know that it would be better if there was less unnecessary pain in the world. You don't need a religious system to believe that. I think that's just inherent part of being a human being, whether we're here on accident or here on purpose or whatever. It just is. And I feel the same way about meaning. We're wired in a certain way where meaning inhabits us. It inhabits our thoughts. It inhabits our behavior. And it's just as real as pain is. When you encounter meaning, it is undeniable. And a lot of us, we have really a drought when it comes to meaning. We don't have that much meaning in our lives. We live very temporarily, very hedonistically. We live in the moment, and we're chasing sort of happiness, which is fleeting. We're chasing sensations. And then we wonder why those things don't sustain us. They come and go, and then we're left feeling just as empty as we did before. If you have meaning in your life, like real meaning in your life, it's pretty hard to feel empty. I mean, it's pretty much, meaning is the antithesis of feeling empty. The thing that you are empty of when you feel empty is meaning, right? That is the void that gets filled. So for me, I lost meaning in my life when I stopped believing in God, because I thought that that's where meaning came from. I thought that this like higher being was what made things in the world matter. And I don't believe that anymore. I've been able to encounter meaning in a variety of ways, a variety of different relationships. Even things like fostering cats I found to be very meaningful. I would raise these little kittens who were too young to be adopted, who were sick or injured or something. And when they were healthy enough and old enough, I would get them adopted through an agency in San Diego. And it was super painful to let go of the cats every time I had to let them get adopted. But I knew that it was good work that I was doing, and there was meaning to be found in that. And, it was especially rewarding when I would get emails from the people who adopted the cats with updates about how well they were doing. Like, if you have stuff like that in your life, it's pretty hard to feel empty. It's really nourishing. And for some reason, we don't talk about that. We don't like necessarily encourage each other um, to do these things as much as we should. We're all kind of just focused on our own selfish desires, which end up not paying off. So if you're stuck, try doing something that you know will make someone else's life better. And if you can't do that, then try doing something that you know will make your life better. And I'm not talking about things here that are sort of fleeting. Um, the One of the things that Jordan Peterson always tells people to do is just start by cleaning your room. Like cleaning your room, it's a small improvement. It's not going to necessarily change your life, but it makes things better. Living in a clean room, an orderly room, is a little bit better than living one that's a mess where everything's disorganized and you don't know where everything is. And it's work to do that. And by doing that work, you can find meaning, even if it's just a little bit. It'll give you somewhere to start. And what you'll find is that the more meaning you have in your life, the more tolerable all of the tragedy that you encounter becomes. And, I think that some people will have a higher need for meaning than others. If you're someone with a lot of tragedy in your life, you're going to need a lot of meaning to balance that out. You need something that justifies your existence. You need something where you can convince yourself that it's worth it to keep going on. And, when it comes to just living hedonistically, there's not that much partying or drugs or sleeping around or eating at nice restaurants or buying like driving a sports car. Like, it's, if your life is full of tragedy, if you've encountered malevolence, in your relationships, then those things will distract you, but they won't nourish you. And, that's why we have celebrities that still succumb to things like suicide and drug overdose, even though they have a lot of material or surface level things that are going well for them. They still haven't found a way to justify continuing their existence. And, maybe some of that has to do with their overall mindset, or maybe some of it simply just has to do with a moment of bad judgment that they had, or their thoughts being altered by being under the influence. There's a lot of different things that lead to someone ending their life. And I'm not trying to sit here and pretend like I, like I understand all of that, or that I'm somehow better than these people are, because it's not how I see it. What I am is fortunate enough to come across, like I said, to come across the right ideas at the right time, and fortunate enough to be in a position where I can pursue meaning. And I've been able to balance the two things out to where no matter what tragedy strikes in my life, I have things going on in my life that make it feel like I matter. It makes it feel like my existence accomplishes something, and that's a good feeling. So I'm going to continue to do that. Now, when it comes to nihilism, the best way to really defeat nihilism is just to listen to Peterson's lectures. I'm not going to be able to do in one YouTube video what he does in his lectures. This first video here is kind of it's an overview of the book that he wrote a couple years ago, so it'll kind of summarize a lot of his ideas, and that's a good starting point. If you want to dive deeper into this stuff and really get to like the underlying philosophy that I genuinely believe has like defeated nihilism, then there's 3 other lecture series here that I've linked to, and there's a ton of material here. Each one of these links is the first part of a lecture series that's like 10 to 15 lectures long, and each lecture is like 2 hours. So there's tons of stuff to absorb here. Highly worth it. I've gone through each one of these lectures at least twice each over the last few years. A lot of it is pretty dense. You might not be able to, watch more than like an hour at a time. I like taking notes so that I can, kind of absorb what he's saying, because a lot of it is pretty complex. But The first one here is his lectures on the biblical stories. And again, you don't need to have any like religious tradition to get something out of this. He's not approaching them from a religious angle. He's approaching them from a psychological angle. Um, and this just kind of, it digs up the foundational beliefs that we have, particularly in Western society, things that we may or may not realize that we believe, and really talks about like how those things got started and where we're at. This next one here, Maps of Meaning, this is a little bit more of like a technical lecture series. It's a bit more like philosophical and kind of, if you're not someone who likes to analyze things a lot, then this one might be a little dense, but I still found it profoundly useful personally. And then this last one here, I think is a lot more accessible. This is the Personality and Its Transformations lecture. So this is another lecture series that he gave at the University of Toronto, and it just talks about human nature and just really, really profound insight into like who we are and how we're, what drives us and what moves us forward. So, again, there's only so much that I can say about this since these ideas take a long time to absorb. But I just want to reiterate, like, I'm someone who wrestled with nihilism in a big way. And when I was in college, I took graduate level courses on ethics and epistemology and everything else that I could to try to find a logical answer to the loss of my religious belief, to find a logical reason why my life still had significance or still had purpose, or however you want to put it. And I couldn't do that until I listened to Jordan's lectures. So I can't overstate how beneficial his way of thinking has been. I hope you guys check it out. If you ever want to discuss these ideas, hop in Discord. I'll be there. There's other people in the community that I'm sure will be interested in talking about this stuff as well. And I hope you guys found this helpful. Take care of yourselves. I love you guys. Peace.